This is on the NV 5600 transmission.
You
Manual transmission test 6.
take the fill plug out, or take the, should have a check plug.
Take the plug out and what?
Put your finger in.
See if it's got something up there. Now, did you know the differentials on some of these trucks, like on these truck that Moody's are working on right now, do you know what the criteria is for the fluid level in the rear end on that one? You ever looked at that tag, that plastic tag that's on there? It's supposed to be 40 millimeters below the fill hold, is what it says, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, look at that, weird, isn't it? 40 millimeters is over an inch. I mean, like an inch and a half or something. I don't think I like that, you know, personally. We put some differential gears in a F-150 here one time that had positive traction rear end in it, and it had special oil to go in it, synthetic rear end grease. And that grease was so expensive that the business office called and wanted to know if I'd made a mistake when I charged it out. It took $50 worth of oil to go in that thing. A 99 Jeep Grand Cherokee equipped with an NV247 transfer case and Verilok axles is said to have what system? Quadra drive system. When installing the shift components on the NV1500 transmission, what is the shorter of the two roll pins used for? Yeah, that is a very specific question. If you didn't read that handout, you wouldn't have no earthly idea. When staking a new output shaft nut on an NV5600, or use a round end punch with a diameter of approximately, wow, you all are good. Before checking the operation of a Verilok axle, shift the transfer case into what in the transmission? So you got that. Yeah, 4 low and park. The proper end play measurement for the NV5600 main shaft and counter shaft should be between what?
Between 2 and 6 thousandths.
2 and 6 thousandths is a good answer. Usually when you say .002, that sounds like you don't know what that means. Okay.
So?
What?
So it reads, it's what it looks like on the paper.
I know, but you got to be able to measure something and tell what you're looking at. You have to have a mental ability to determine what kind of distance is talking about. Like I'll tell somebody, how many thousandths of an inch is an inch? And they'll say, I don't know, 1,000, I guess. Okay, how many is a half an inch?
Half.
I don't know. Well, think about it. What's half of 1,000? Oh, 500. Okay, now what's half of 500? 250,000. So how much of an inch is that in fractions? I don't know. Well, how about a quarter? Oh, yeah. So what's half of 250? 125. So 125 thousandths is an eighth of an inch. So you can put all that stuff together in your head. And when somebody says 750 thousandths, you instantly know it's 3/4 of an inch. That's what you need to be able to do. You know, just you need to be able to burn that stuff in. And so that's the only thing. But of course, now that I've said that, I will stumble when I'm on a paper and I'll say .002 and Melissa will be all over me.
Yeah.
Okay, what's an easy way to tell the difference between an NV1500 and AX15 transmission?
Aluminum
15
center
has
plate.
aluminum center plate.
Yeah, the aluminum center plate is a key identifying feature. The lubrication pump on an NV247 is smaller than the pump on the previous NV. That's false, isn't it? It's not. Technician A says the NV5600 transmission weighs more than 350 pounds. Technician B disagrees, saying the NV5600 weighs about 200 pounds. Who's correct about that? A is right.
Both technicians.
When assembling the dual cone 1-2 synchronizer for the NV5600, be sure that what are seated in the what?
High areas on the frictional ring,
Or
low
seated
areas
in
on the
low
floor.
areas of the
Yeah,
ring.
high and low, high and low. Okay, that was 6. Now we're going back up and do 5. Got me? All right. Make sure you put your name on those and turn them in. They're not doing you any good if they stay on your clipboard. Okay. Manual transmission test 5. And let's talk about some CV axles. The leading cause of joint failure, and we're talking about CV joint failure, is boot contamination. That's actually false. It's not boot contamination, it's when the boot basically busts and then dust and dirt and crud gets in there and it grinds up those CV joints. And when we get into driveline, I have you taking CV joints apart and putting them back together and all that. And one time I had a whole bunch of CV joints. I mean, a bunch of them. I still got a lot of them that have them in. And I says, everybody take these CV joints apart, every one of them, and put them back together. You know, and it's sort of like a puzzle. You can do it, but you know, you got to get used to it. And they're slightly different, all that. So I had a bunch of them. They were doing that. The balls weren't dirty. Everything was clean and polished, and you could just play around with them. And several of them did it. And finally, one knothead took them apart, piled all the stuff in a corner, and mixed up all the balls. And they're all different sizes. Well, that's a dummy. You know, he just got tired of fooling with it, and he just got frustrated and walked away and made a mess out of the whole thing. And anyway, GI, AAR, and NTP are variations of the Rizeppa CV joint. That's false. Outer CV joints wear at a faster rate than inner CV joints.
True.
That is true.
Very true.
What's the difference between an outer CV joint and an inner CV joint as far as the job they have to do?
The outer CV joint turns every time you turn. It puts it in the groove every time you turn.
I mean, but why is the inner one even necessary?
To flex the engine.
I mean, it doesn't turn when you turn, does
Turns
it?
the axle and it needs an inner one to
It's
turn
to
the
flex
axle.
with the engine and suspension.
What about it plunges?
I was-
Why does it need to plunge?
It's a plunger.
It needs to plunge because the suspension changes. See what I'm doing with my arms here? The suspension goes up, it's got to plunge. Okay, the outer one has got to be able to handle tight turns. And why do they call them constant velocity
Because
joints?
they're always turning when they're in gear. I mean, in neutral too.
Well, the drive shaft on my pickup is always turning when I'm getting gear, but it's not that, they don't have constant velocity joints on it. Here's the reason. Listen to this. Listen, it's important now. You need to know this. How many of you guys have used, have you ever taken, and I know Mr. handles tools since he was a very small boy, you'd ever take an impact wrench and put a regular conventional wiggler on it and try to use it, and it goes, you know, it just goes crazy, and it can bend over far enough to where it just slings the socket all the way across the shop and all this. Well, you might notice that those kind of CV joints that have got that cross top, they get, when you're bending them too tight, they get hard and easy and hard and easy and hard and easy. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, they slow down and speed up, slow down and speed up. That's why they're doing all that kind of stuff. But what happens when you put an impact wiggler on there? It's got a ball with a slot. That's a constant velocity joint. An impact socket, you know, I'm talking about the impact wiggler. That's a constant velocity joint because you can bend it all the way as far as it'll bend, and it still turns at the same speed and effort. It doesn't go, you know, like those old ones do. That's the difference between they call it constant velocity because even at a tight turn, it doesn't get hard and easy and hard and easy and hard and easy and slow and fast and slow and fast. Constant velocity, see? I heard, you know, my dad, whenever Volkswagen Bugs got constant velocity joints in 1969 and 68, they had the swing axles and they didn't have CV joints in them. And I always thought that was a cool name for something when my dad would say CV joints. It wasn't CV joint, constant velocity joint. Well, I never asked him what constant velocity joint meant. I just assumed that, hey, that's what you call them, whatever, you know, this kind of thing. But I mean, that's basically the reason for that. And, you know, you can go into that too heavy, but just think about an extension you're putting on your long extension with your impact wrench. Okay, inner and outer CV joints move the same way. Number 5, yeah. Incidentally, inner CV joints don't usually wear out all that often. I mean, they can, but usually the outer ones are the ones that's doing the clicking and everything. You know, when somebody's turning, going click, 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 click. You know, that's basically. And sometimes when they really get to the end of their useful life, somebody will start to drive off, and the balls will fall out of the CV joint. They'll just be sitting there. They can't go anywhere. Let's see. The most common CV joint design is the tripod joint. That's false. That is false. The inner CV joint is designed to plunge in and out.
True.
That is true. The cross groove CV joint is commonly used on European vehicles and applications where space is limited. Doesn't take as much space for a cross groove joint. I had a cross groove joint up here somewhere that I used to have people take apart and put back together, and somebody came and took it apart and just left it took apart because they couldn't figure out how to put it back together, and they lost some of the balls. I don't know where that darn thing is now, but it was off of a Volkswagen Rabbit. That's what those were for, the inner ones.
True.
So it's easier and less costly to use the ball and cage design rather than the spider assembly. Now, when you start taking them apart, this stuff will come a little clearer to you, the ball and cage design. You know what they're talking about there? A ball and cage design. How many parts are there to a ball and cage design?
7.
Really? What about the outer shell?
Okay,
That's
32.
8, right? So it's got 6 balls, it's got a cage, Well, no, 9. It's got 6 balls, it's got a cage, an inner race, outer race, and a cage. So that's 9 parts that you got to a ball and cage CV joint, all that. And you can take those apart. And I've got, like I say, CV axles, I just usually hang on to them if they don't have a core, because I like having them for people to take apart. And also, if you want to scare people out of here, you can give them a greasy CV joint right to start with, and if they say, oh, this is not for me, I'll go away, you know, so. Which of the following steps is done first when disassembling a Resepa joint?
Wait, you definitely skipped one.
I would get the CV joint boots and clamp out of the way, wouldn't you?
That's what I would do too.
Yeah.
What, was 8 true or false?
Oh, 8 was false. Sorry about that. Which of the following steps is done last when it's disassembling a Resepa joint?
The cage.
Spider. Or no, the roller walls.
No, you'll get the cage out of it. The cage is going to be still moving around in there after you've got the center out, the balls out and everything, and you turn the cage, line those windows up with the 2 low spot, pop it out of there. Which of the following statements about CV joints is incorrect? A, the outer CV joint is fixed and does not have the capability to plunge. B, the outer CV joint moves more than 45 degrees to follow the steering angle of the front wheels. C, a CV joint maintains shaft speed by bisecting the angle of the joint. And D, CV joints use bevel gears to transmit torque.
A.
Have you ever seen a CV joint with bevel gears? Come on. All of the following are common symptoms of CV joint wear except A, popping or clicking noises when turning. B, a chattering noise when backing. C, a clunk when accelerating or decelerating. Or D, humming or growling sound that changes with vehicle speed.
The,
Everybody like that answer? It's B, actually. They don't, the backing up or going forward doesn't usually make a difference. If I told you I had on my rear wheel drive pickup, if I was driving along and I drive forward and I get a click, 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 click noise and I'm backing up and it goes squeak, 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 what do you gonna think's wrong with it? It's changing sounds. It's making a sounds going both ways. It goes click, 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 going forward, you put it in reverse, it goes backing up.
differential?
And no, that's actually gonna be the U-joints. It'll be bad. I used to run into that. One time when I was young and dumb, I asked somebody about that. I said, the thing clicks when I'm going forward. I said, does it squeak when you're backing up? I said, yeah, you got a bad. And you got to pull the drive shaft out and feel those joints to see if they're bad a lot of time. Not every time, but a lot of times you do. Because if they're stiff one way. And where else do we have U-joints that are important on just about every car nowadays? Where else are the U-joints that are important? What about on the steering shaft?
Oh,
On
yeah.
some of these European cars? And those darn things can get stiff and hard. I mean, they go bad the same way your drive shaft,
They're
even though they
very
don't turn as much. And they'll make that thing drive funny, I'm telling you.
They're very hard to find too.
Yeah, you can usually have to buy one of those from the dealership. Which of the following steps is done first when disassembling a Resepa joint?
Remove the CV joint boot clamps and boot.
Well, it says, now this is a crazy, whoever wrote this, is just put 2 of them together that it's going to be the same answer. Remove the CV joint, clamps in the boot. Which of the following steps is done last when doing a Resepa joint?
Align the windows with the grooves.
Align the 2 cage windows with the grooves in the outer housing and lift the cage and inner race out of the housing. That was a disassembly thing. When installing wheel bearings, tighten the spindle nut to what to remove all play?
50? 25?
25 Ob-foot. Pound-feet. Sealed wheel bearings. A, do not need periodic maintenance. B, are made of heat-treated steel to resist wear. C, are permanently lubricated. Or D, all of the above.
D, all the above.
How many of you guys, has anybody in here changed the bearings on the front-wheel drive, car? Like which kind did you have? I mean, I'm talking about on a front-wheel drive car.
I had the assembly.
Huh?
Assembly.
Just, yeah, you unbolt it.
3,000.
Right, huh?
It'd be 2,500, 3,000 Mazda.
That's not front-wheel drive,
I
though, is
know,
it?
I understand that on that.
Yeah, but basically, some of them, you've got to take that thing and press it. As a matter of fact, I got a YouTube video that I'm gonna be showing you in just
I
a minute.
watched it.
Ours are like.
Yeah, on the bearings where you gotta press it all out of there and like hogwash.
The 2000 model Civics, you have to.
Yeah,
Have
and,
them press it.
Yeah. All right.
Or model before that.
Number 17, a damper is what? Does it remove moisture from a joint?
B.
Balance weight fitted around a half shaft. That's a vibration damper. Kind of like, it looks like a harmonic balancer, but it's on the drive. And you'll see some of those on drive shaft too. You got that? All right, now let's look at our grades.